once Muhammad reached Mecca, he is supposed to pass away, and the caliphate, Rashidun Caliphate, is supposed to take over. Abu Bakr, Umar, Ali, Uthman. Yeah, Uthman, Ali. Have you got any evidence for the existence of any one of those guys?
There probably is some. I don't have it.
Have you got?
I've not studied it.
So you're only assuming.
Probably some out there.
You don't know. You don't know this.
I don't personally know.
Sure. In other words, I'm asking you, you don't know. That's good. So you don't know that either. The identities of the religion called Islam, of followers of religion being called Muslims, and for Muhammad being acknowledged as a prophet, for these three things, which are core identifying factors, which is supposed to have started at 6:32. Remember at Hijri when Muhammad is supposed to return to Mecca. Have you got any evidence?
I don't know.
In other words, can you see what is going on here? We are talking about the significant Islamic story, and you have no evidence for any of these. I'll now move on. Have you got any evidence for claiming, based on evidence, who put together the Quran? Any evidence at all?
I don't have any.
You don't have any also. Your traditions, your later day Mickey Mouse stories tell us that Uthman put it together, put this Quran together. Some other details tell us Abu Bakr put it together first time. Some other details tell us Muhammad himself left the book behind. Regardless, you don't.
I don't know that.
Yeah. Essentially, some hear some version, some others hear some other version of the story. But have you got any evidence for any of these three versions? One of these?
I don't know. He doesn't know.
Are you familiar with the fact that, for all the questions that I've asked you so far,
I said I don't know.
you said you don't know, which means you haven't given any positive evidence.
Of course.
But I can readily give plenty of negative evidence to clearly demonstrate that none of these things could have happened. Yeah? I'll give you a simple example.
In the study of world religions, one of the most important criteria for evaluating the historical credibility of a faith is whether its key events are confirmed by contemporary evidence, both internal and external. When we look at Christianity, for example, its central figure, Jesus of Nazareth, is known not only through the writings of his followers, but also through non-Christian historians like Tacitus, Josephus, and Pliny the Younger, who lived not long after his time. While there may be debate about his divine nature, the historical existence of Jesus and his impact are widely acknowledged, even by secular scholars. In contrast, when we examine the early period of Islam, particularly during the lifetime of Muhammad and the emergence of the Qur'an, we encounter a surprising silence in the historical record. Islamic tradition claims that Muhammad was the final prophet, delivering divine revelation that shook the Arabian Peninsula starting in 610 AD. And yet the outside world seems to have taken no notice. Roman, Byzantine, Persian, and Eastern Christian sources from the 7th century make no clear mention of Muhammad, the Qur'an, or even Islam as a new religion. At most, there are vague references, terms like Saracens or false prophets, which only appear in the decades following his death, and never with the theological clarity found in Islamic tradition. Meanwhile, global figures of the same era, such as Emperor Heraclius, Pope Honorius, or even ancient biblical figures like Isaiah, are traceable in historical records, administrative documents, official letters, inscriptions, and archaeological findings. But Muhammad, who supposedly led armies, governed a religious political community, and claimed direct revelation from God, left behind no authenticated inscriptions, personal letters, or undisputed Qur'anic manuscripts from his own lifetime. Even more striking is that the official Islamic narrative itself was not written down until more than a century after Muhammad's death. The first biography of the Prophet was compiled by Ibn Ishaq in the mid-8th century, but his original work no longer exists. What we have is a redacted version by Ibn Hisham, who openly admits to omitting sections he deemed shameful or inappropriate. The Hadith collections, foundational to Islamic theology and law, were only canonized nearly 2 centuries later by scholars like Bukhari and Muslim. Contrast this with early Christianity. Paul's letters, such as 1 Corinthians, were written within 20 years of the crucifixion. The Gospel of Mark, believed to be the earliest biography of Jesus, was composed during the lifetime of eyewitnesses. These writings were cited and circulated widely before the end of the 1st century, showing a remarkably fast documentation of key events. In this context, Islam stands upon a historical silence, while other major faiths, like Judaism and Christianity, emerge in the ancient world accompanied by voices, documents, and controversy. The absence of contemporary witnesses to Muhammad and the Qur'an, along with the delayed writing of Islam's own sources, raises an essential question. Are we dealing with authentic history or with a retroactive tradition constructed to solidify the identity of a later community?
Muhammad being from Mecca. No, maybe I'll focus on the Hijra. Yeah, I'll focus on Hijra right now. Hijra is supposed to be based on a persecution where Muslims were fleeing Mecca. Yeah, because they are persecuted for their own lives. Supposedly, they are fleeing Mecca and they are going to Medina. Yeah. Let's say you are. Of course, you live today. But for a moment, if you do a thought experiment, if you lived at that time as a Muslim, who has become a Muslim, you know they are going to kill you in Mecca. Yeah.
Yes.
Should anyone tell you to, hey, my dear, what's your name? Nadeem. Hey, Nadeem, they are going to kill you because you are a Muslim. Flee. Don't make friends with them. Will anyone tell you, please don't sit here and make friends with them? Will anyone advise you on that? Maybe not, because you will know you have to flee for your life. Yeah. But go through the Quran. In the Quran, the Quran testifies of a Hijra. You know this Hijra? The Quran testifies of a Hijra multiple times. Multiple times the Quran testifies. But would you believe that in many of these times the Quran says, Muslims, this is not optional, you have to run. Number one. Number two, Muslims, don't sit here, make friends. Both of these contradict the claim that the Muslims realized that their lives were in mortal danger. Some Muslims, who were later called munafiqs, clearly thought they could be Muslims and stay wherever they were staying without having to engage in a hijrah and with making friends. They thought there was no risk in that. But others said, no, if you want to serve Allah, you have to flee. Clearly indicating that there was no mortal danger, no one was forcing anyone like that from wherever they were staying. And number two, clearly by the fact that they were making friends, again, they were not forced to flee. In other words, whatever hijrah is recorded in the Quran is a hijrah which was a voluntary, without persecution, mobilization of a murderous death cult. Non-Muslims did not force them, because if they had, every Muslim already would have known to flee. But clearly there were many who did not realize that, the importance of that. So this is an evidence from your own Quran to explain to you that the hijrah that really happened wasn't from Mecca to Medina, fleeing because of a persecution of Arabs. I'll give you one additional information. You as a Muslim would be familiar with the idea that in the Islamic calendar, Hijra is a significant event, yeah? Supposedly. To an extent, as Christians would have Anno Domini AD, as a Muslim or Muslims, the Ummah has anti-Hijra, yeah? The calendar, Islamic calendar is based off a Hijra, yeah? You know this. Yet, we have early rock inscriptions from Hijazi, post 632 AD, for about 80 years.
Before?
No, after 632 AD, which is when
80.
Plus 80. For 632 AD to, from 632 to about 700, you study rock inscriptions. They used a calendar not based on Hijra. In other words, the people of that time in Hijazi. Are you from Pakistan?
India.
From India. You are from India, I am from India. You're a fellow human Indian. Yeah. And of course we both live here right now. So we are fellow human beings. And even without that, even if we lived in a foreign land to each other, we are fellow human beings. So we can, exchange good wishes towards each other. What I can say is even though Hijra is meant to be significant, so much so every Islamic calendar is based on Hijra, the early who are meant to be from the Islamic heartland don't use that calendar.
You have the pictures of them rocks.
Oh yeah, today we have archaeological ones. I don't know if my internet is going to work. Unfortunately, my 5G, I can just quick glance.
When historians refer to a rock calendar in the context of early Islamic history, they are usually talking about stone inscriptions bearing Hijri year dates. These inscriptions are invaluable to scholars because they provide tangible, datable evidence for tracing when the Hijri calendar began to be used in an official capacity. In historical research, epigraphic evidence like this serves as a far more objective anchor point than oral tradition, since it was created relatively close in time to the events it records. Several inscriptions from the second half of the 7th century do show the use of Hijri dating, but their appearance does not coincide directly with Muhammad's death in 632 AD. One frequently cited example is the Zuhair inscription in present-day Saudi Arabia, dated to the year 24th AH, around 644-645 AD. While the Hijri date is clearly inscribed, it makes no mention of Muhammad and omits the full formula, Muhammad, Messenger of Allah, that would later become standard. This raises the question of whether the calendar was truly standardized across the Muslim world at that time, or whether it was still confined to certain administrative circles. Another example is the Qasr al-Halabat inscription in Jordan, dated to the mid-7th century, approximately 660-680 AD. This text suggests that the Hijri calendar was used in construction projects and administrative records in the provinces. However, it still comes several decades after Muhammad's death. Many other inscriptions from Syria and the Arabian Peninsula contain religious formulas, such as the Basmala, but do not always name Muhammad, and in many cases the dates are either unclear or damaged. This pattern indicates that the adoption of the Hijri calendar was not an immediate universal practice from 622 AD, as Islamic tradition presents it, but rather a gradual process. While tradition claims that the Hijri calendar was officially established during the caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab around 638 AD, the earliest surviving physical evidence shows only partial usage, and not always in direct association with Islamic theological identity in its formative stage. Academic perspectives support this reading. Robert Hoyland, in Seeing Islam as Others Saw It, notes that the combination of Hijri dates with explicit references to Muhammad appears consistently in material evidence only in the later 7th century, particularly under the rule of Abd al-Malik. François Desroches, a leading scholar of Qur'anic manuscripts, likewise points out that early Qur'an codices rarely include Hijri dates, and none can be securely proven to originate from Muhammad's lifetime. Both scholars conclude that administrative standardization, including the consistent use of the Hijri calendar, emerged only after the Muslim community evolved into a more structured caliphal state. Taken together, the rock calendar evidence suggests that the Hijri calendar was not a fully functioning system from the moment of 622 AD, but the product of an adoption process that reached maturity several decades later. This development appears to have gone hand in hand with the formation of a more formalized political theological Islamic identity in the late 7th century.